Hi, Jason. How are you? I can't hear you. Oh, you muted yourself. Let me unmute you.
Come back. There we
Okay.
go. Hello. How are you?
Good, good. Thank God. Thanks for doing this. I'm going to make you co-host,
Great.
so you'll be able to control your share and all that. See if I could spotlight you.
Great.
All right. All right. So people are coming in. The previous share is still going on.
Okay.
So we'll give people a chance to transition over.
Great.
All right. How do you want this to work? Do you want participants to be able to unmute themselves and ask you questions?
Yeah, sure. I enjoy interactive participation.
All right. That is set. All right, they're just finishing the other share, so give people some time to come in. We'll wait another minute or so. Yep, getting a lot of transfers. All right. All right, let's get started. Thank you, Jason Cyrulnik, for speaking tonight. Jason's a Teaneck resident, member of Beth Aaron, also Orsaja. I've unmuted everybody. I've given everyone, the ability to unmute yourselves. So if you do have any questions and find a opportune time to chime in, feel free. You can also send your messages to me, and I can relay them as well. Whatever you're more comfortable with, or perhaps wait until the end when there's an opportunity. So without further ado.
Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining. I do encourage participation, so feel free to jump in or to answer questions or to ask questions. I'd like to frame tonight's, the subject for tonight's share with the following general observation. I think the challenge that we encounter in trying to analyze the nature of the holiday of Shavuot, in contrast to the other holidays, is really caused by two particular challenges. Number one, there is no core sugya, there's no core tractate devoted to the holiday of Shavuot. There's a tractate devoted to each of the other holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, called Yoma, Pesachim for Pesach, Sukkah for Sukkah. There's no Masechta devoted to the holiday of Shavuot, notwithstanding the fact that, of course, there is a tractate called Shavuot that has nothing to do with the holiday we're about to celebrate, that has to do with the laws and principles of oaths. But the real challenge that I think we face is that there are a lot of misconceptions about the holiday that have been ingrained in our heads since a very early age. And I think what that really causes is a lack of drive to really expose some of the more fundamental issues that the understanding the nature of the holiday poses when you look at the primary sources and try to understand what this holiday is really about. And thus the title for tonight's shir, Unmasking the Mystery or Unraveling the Confusion, the Untold Story of the Shavuot Festival. What I'd like to do with you in the next 35 or 40 minutes is try to explore together with you the nature of the holiday and build together with you an understanding of what the holiday is all about. And I do think there truly is an untold story here that, for reasons we can discuss either after this year or another time, was intentionally omitted, but that I think it's very important to understand if we want to appreciate what the holiday is all about. So to begin, I'd like to start with a question that I think will get us all thinking about the odd nature of the holiday and something that's really problematic about it. And I actually want to start outside the context of Shavuos. I want to ask you a question with respect to a more general issue that comes up in halacha with respect to the holidays in general. The Gemara in Pesachim Daf Samach Ches Amud Beis poses the following problem, and in so doing, it also walks through a couple of different solutions. So first, I want to start by showing you the problem that the Gemara contemplates, and I want to ask you how you would have resolved the problem. So let me try to see if I can share my screen. If I can, and I will do it out loud. I'm not sure this will work. There it is. That's not working. Okay. So while I try to share my screen, let me tell you what the Gemara is dealing with. The Gemara poses the following problem. There are two psukim in the Torah. There are two times in the Torah that God tells us how we are supposed to conduct ourselves when we are observing a Jewish holiday. One pasuk tells us, and we're talking about a pasuk in Parshas Pinchas and a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. One pasuk tells us that the holiday is supposed to be devoted to God. Atzeres laHashem Elokecha. It is a day that is supposed to be devoted to God. Easy enough. Another pasuk tells us that the day is supposed to be devoted to yourselves. Atzeres tihiyeh lachem. The holiday is supposed to be for you. Atzeres tihiyeh lachem. So the Gemara in Psachim Daf Samach Ches Amud Beis poses the following question: how are we supposed to reconcile this seeming contradiction? The Gemara asks. One pasuk tells us we're supposed to devote the day to God, and one tells us that we're supposed to devote holidays to ourselves. Atzeres tihiyeh lachem and atzeres laHashem Elokecha. How are we supposed to accomplish those two directives? That's the Gemara's question.
Yes, sir.
It appears in multiple different places, but we'll focus now on the Gemara Psachim Daf Samach Ches Amud Beis. So before I get to the Gemara's solution to this problem, I would ask anybody over here, if you were tasked with authoring a code of Jewish law, if you were Rav Yosef Karo and you were asked to write the Shulchan Aruch with respect to Hilchos Yom Tif, you're supposed to tell people how to practically manifest the Torah's directives in their lives. And so you now turn to the Siman on writing the laws of Yom Tif, and you are now supposed to translate the two psukim that I just recounted for you and that the Gemara recounted in Psachim Daf Samach Ches. You are supposed to reduce those to a set of laws for people to observe. And you realize that there is some tension between devoting a day to Hashem and devoting a day to yourself. How would you propose reconciling those two in terms of a practical suggestion, a practical directive to the Jewish people? Anybody have a suggestion? I think that's exactly right. I don't know who said it, but whoever did, that sounds like it's spot on. Presumably, the Torah is telling us two things that we're supposed to accomplish on the Yom Tif day. We're supposed to be experiencing it for God and for ourselves, devoting it to God and to ourselves. And so the natural solution to that supposed problem would be you're supposed to do both. You take the day and you divide it up, half-half. Maybe there's some other split, but you're supposed to divide the day up and accomplish both of the directives of the Torah. And indeed, if you look at the Gemara, Psachim Daf Samach Ches Amud Beis, that is precisely what we are told Rabbi Yehoshua tells us to do. We are told Rabbi Yehoshua says this is a very simple problem to solve. These two psukim tell me that I am supposed to split the day up, and a holiday needs to be split 50% towards God, in tefillah and in limud haTorah, you learn, you daven, and 50% of the day is supposed to have some sense of enjoyment, even if it's spiritual enjoyment including achila ushtiya. Well, the Yeshua solution seems like it is, I would venture to say, the same solution that everybody on this Zoom would have probably suggested if given sufficient time. What's really odd about this Gemara is the fact that there is somebody who argues on Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yeshua's famous Bar Plukta, his famous arch nemesis in a sense, Rabbi Eliezer, disagrees with Rabbi Yeshua's solution to this problem. And Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: Kasav echad omer laHashem atzeres tihiyeh laHashem Elokecha. Kasav echad omer atzeres tihiyeh lachem. One pasuk says devote the holiday to God. One says devote it to yourself. How do you accomplish these two? Very simple. O kula lachem, o chetzi lachem. In Rabbi Eliezer's word, ein lo li'adam b'yantif. A person on yantif should not do both of the following, but he needs to choose. Ella o ochel v'shosa. He should either choose to spend the day eating and drinking and being happy, o yoshe v'shona, or devoting the day to God. Rabbi Eliezer's solution strikes me, and I would imagine all of you, as extraordinarily strange. Since when are we permitted, let alone directed, to treat the Torah as a choose-your-own-adventure book? The Torah clearly tells us in two different places that we are supposed to do two different things. We're supposed to devote the day to God, devote the day to ourselves. How is it that Rabbi Eliezer sees in that an option for us to choose? Which one do we like better, eating and drinking or learning and davening? You choose, either one is fine. We don't see Rabbi Eliezer saying this anywhere else in Shas. And it's not like this is the only time in halacha where we are confronted with a similar situation. We have other examples where the Torah tells us things that seem to be somewhat in tension with each other. And the way that we resolve it is always according to the logical suggestion that you guys had proposed and the one that Rabbi Yoshua subscribes to. I'll give you just two or three examples briefly. The Torah tells us that you are supposed to honor your parents. The Torah elsewhere tells us that you are supposed to fear your parents. Ish imo ve'aviv tira'u. What is the practical directive that we are all following in our daily lives as a result of those two psukim? Very simple. We both honor our parents and fear our parents. So where is Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to Hilchos Kibud Av V'Em? Why is Rabbi Eliezer not piping up and saying, I disagree? I believe what the Torah is doing is it's giving us an option. You can honor your parents or you can fear them. You choose, depending on the parent, depending on the child. There may be one that's better suited, but you're allowed to choose between those two. The Torah tells us the same thing with respect to God. You're supposed to love God, but you're supposed to fear God. As Hashem Elokecha tira. Why does Rabbi Eliezer not pipe up and say, this is also an example where the Torah is giving us a choice. You decide whether you better relate to God as a fearful relationship, a relationship built on fear, or one built on love. And the examples go on and on. The fact of the matter is, Rabbi Eliezer never suggests anything similar to what over here in Hilchos Yantif, where he tells you that you are allowed to choose. I think this is a very important question for us to ask. You know, a lot of the Mefarshim deal with, well, which one's right? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, which opinion makes more sense? At the end of the day, the question we need to ask ourselves is not just how do we explain Rabbi Eliezer's very odd position, but how could it possibly be that Rabbi Eliezer is comfortable with the suggestion of reading the Torah as a choose-your-own-adventure book, and yet never anywhere else in halacha pipes up and suggests that you're allowed to do so? I'd like to suggest that the only way we could possibly answer this question, and I will readily admit that there needs to be a lot more meat placed on the bone to really do so, but that's not the subject of tonight's shiur. It has to be the case that Rabbi Eliezer views the two directives of devoting the day of Yantif to God and devoting the day of Yantif to yourselves as so not just tension-filled, but such competing, almost contradictory directives that they cannot coexist. Indeed, there is precedent in halacha where two directives literally cannot be accomplished together. We are supposed to choose between the two of them. A classic example, there is a prohibition against cutting off sara'as, leprosy that appears on your skin. You are not allowed to cut it off. There is also a positive commandment that you are required to cut off the orla, the foreskin on a baby boy who is 8 days old. And of course, the question arises, what if, in the odd situation, a baby boy who's 8 days old happens to have happens to have saras in the very place where the bris milah is supposed to be performed? How do we accomplish both of the Torah's directives? How do we, on the one hand, at the same time, perform the mitzvah of bris milah, but at the exact same time, not cut off saras? It's impossible. And so, of course, many of us are familiar with the fact that halacha does have a way of dealing with the direct contradiction directives or prohibitions. And there are principles, for example, a positive commandment chosen in favor of a negative commandment or overrides a negative commandment. In most scenarios, esse doche lotase, a positive commandment would win out. And so in the example that I just proposed, you would perform the bris milah because there's a positive commandment to do so, notwithstanding the fact that in cutting off the baby boy's bris milah, you will also be violating, in theory, the prohibition against cutting off tzaras. So it is possible. There are scenarios where we recognize in halacha that you do not perform two mitzvahs that the Torah told you to perform because it's impossible. And so presumably the only explanation we can give for Rabbi Eliezer, which again, I won't get into in detail here, but the only explanation has to be that Rabbi Eliezer views the Torah's directive to devote the day to God and the Torah's competing directive to devote the day to yourself as so contradictory, so impossible to reconcile, that he is comfortable with the proposition that they have to be either or. They have to be chosen between, and so he offers that choice to the individual. Now, and with this, I'm going to close out this opening question. The reason why this issue comes up, I think, in framing tonight's share is because of the follow-up piece of Gemara that appears 3 lines later in Pesachim Daf Samach Ches Amud Beis. The Gemara quotes Rab Elazar, not to be confused with Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Elazar has one critical qualification for what we just said. He says that Rabbi Eliezer always disagrees with Rabbi Yehoshua and says that instead of splitting the Yontif day, half for yourself, half for God, half eating and drinking, half learning and davening, Rabbi Eliezer allows you to choose, or actually tells you have to choose between those two. But there's one exception to that rule, and that is on the holiday of Shavuos. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Hakol modim ba'atzeres, everybody agrees on the holiday of Shavuos, which of course is called Atzeres, not to be confused with the Atzeres in the Torah. Hakol modim ba'atzeres, everyone agrees on the holiday that we are about to start celebrating tomorrow night, that on that one holiday, Debe'ina nami lachem, Rabbi Eliezer agrees to Rabbi Yehoshua that you have to split the day, you have to have some element of enjoyment of yourself, of lachem. Now, of course, the Mefarshim here spend a lot of time trying to figure out why is it that Shavuos is such an exception to Rabbi Eliezer's rule. I don't really care, for purposes of tonight's shir, what the answer to that question is. I think it's a very interesting question, and one where there's a lot of very interesting suggestions by the Mefarshim al-Atar and elsewhere. What I care about is the very fact that Rabbi Eliezer has a qualification. That is, Rabbi Eliezer, when it comes to Shavuos, clearly is comfortable enough with the proposition that we can both do lachem and lashem, we can devote the day partially to God and partially to ourselves. That's obviously a choice. It's obviously an option for Rabbi Eliezer, because on Shavuos he requires it. Once we say that Rabbi Eliezer requires the split that Rabbi Yehoshua proposes, that Rabbi Eliezer adopts that on Shavuos, our question just becomes tenfold more challenging for us to answer. Because the only answer we had devised was that Rabbi Eliezer must view these two as incompatible. And if Lachem and Lashem are incompatible, then I can at least understand why Rabbi Eliezer does not allow for you to split the day and instead has to resort to this choose your own adventure approach. But now we know, according to the Gemara, according to Rabbi Elazar, that Rabbi Eliezer does not believe that Lachem and Lashem are incompatible. And so if they are not incompatible, the question returns. Why would Rabbi Eliezer on every other Yontif, apart from Shavuos, say that rather than split the day half-half to God and to yourselves, you are supposed to choose between these two directives? Why is this extraordinarily odd suggestion being proposed by Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to Yontif? And that's the question I'd like to ultimately answer together with you by the end of the night. And we'll return to that in about 15 minutes. So put that aside if you can. And I'd like to build together with you the shir on the nature of the holiday of Shavuos and use that new framework that we can create together to potentially answer that opening question. Just want to make sure there are no questions on the opening question before I continue. I'll check the chat. Okay, looks good. Okay, everyone understand the opening question? Everyone bothered by that? Okay, so in order to tackle the nature of the holiday of Shavuos, I would venture to say that no Shavuos shir, no shir examining the nature of the holiday is fairly complete without answering one fundamental question that I think everybody has with respect to the holiday of Shavuos. If you think about it, what is the thing that bothers you most about the nature of the holiday of Shavuos, about what we are told the nature of the holiday of Shavuos is about? Anyone want to jump in, or in the interest of time, I'm happy to throw it out there and see if everyone agrees. But if anyone has any suggestions or anything that really bothers them, please feel free. What I have in mind while I'm looking for waiting for other people to jump in is the fact that the nature of the holiday of Shavuos, the holiday that celebrates the monumental event of Matan Torah, is of course never once mentioned in the Torah. And by the end of this year, in addition to answering the open question, I'd like to return to that question and propose to you a new solution as to why it is the Torah never describes Shavuos in the way that we all understand it to be. In order to examine the nature of the holiday of Shavuos, though, I'd like to briefly explore with you the general context of the Moadim, of the holidays, as presented by the Torah, and see how that framework can be applied to the holiday that we are about to start observing tomorrow night. At first glance, Shavuos is a perfect fit into the general framework of the holidays. The holidays are mentioned 5 times in the Torah, 5 times and only 5 times. If you ever hear a shir about the nature of the holidays that's built from the primary sources of the Torah, you can rest assured that with the exception of Pesach, where there's a separate description, preview in Parshas Bo, there are 5 times in the Torah that the holidays are analyzed. Parshas Mishpatim, Parshas Kitisa, Parshas Emor, Parshas Pinchas, and Parshas Re'eh. Twice in Shemos, because it's not in Bereshis, once in Vayikra, once in Bamidbar, and once in Devarim. Those 5 places are divided up into 2 different categories. The first 2 and the last 1 concern the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festivals, and the 2 in the middle, Emor and Pinchas, examine all of the Jewish holidays, which of course include, at a minimum, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Of course, Shavuos belongs to both of these groups. Shavuos appears in all 5 places because it is not only a member of the Jewish festival routine, but also a member of the exclusive set of the 3 festivals, the Shalosh Regalim. At first glance, this makes a lot of sense. Shavuos seems to fit right in. What are the major characteristics, the primary characteristics of a Jewish holiday in halacha? Well, when it comes to the general holidays, we know that there is one classic indicator that you have a holiday over here, which is an Isser Malacha, a mitzvah that you are not allowed to perform work on a holiday. And that, of course, not only pertains to all the holidays that are mentioned in Emor and Pinchas, it, of course, includes Shavuos as well. When it comes to the Shalosh Regalim, there are some other core indicators that we have a regel on our hands. There is a mitzvah of Re'iyah. There is a mitzvah of going up to Yerushalayim and appearing in the Mikdash and bringing a korban called the Korban Re'iyah. And that, of course, pertains to Shavuos as well. There is such a mitzvah there. So we have the core characteristic of an Isser Malacha on the holiday of Shavuos, fits right in. We have a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel, fits right in. We have Korbanos, which of course also pertains to the other holidays. We have Korbanos on Shavuos, which are delineated in Parshas Pinchas. So far so good. Everything looks like it is right on point. The other major characteristic of a holiday, the Shalosh Regalim, is an Avodas Hayom, a special service for the day. On Pesach, we have matzah. On Sukkot, we have sukkah, we have lulav. There's a special mitzvah that is outlined in the Torah for the particular day. And I think it is with this that we start to rethink our framework, and we start to question whether or not Shavuos really fits into the overall framework of the Jewish holidays. If you think about it, what is the Avodas Hayom on Shavuos? Is Shavuos just missing a regular Avodas Hayom, a regular mitzvah that is special for Shavuos, separate and apart from the Korbanos, the Isser Malacha, and the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel? Is there anything special that we do on Shavuos? So I think on the one hand, the answer to that is Shavuos is an outlier. It doesn't seem to have an Avodas Hayom, or at least a traditional Avodas Hayom as we know it. It does have something special. The Torah describes in Parshas Emor in great detail what special service is performed on Shavuos. It's not matzah, it's not sukkah, it's not lulav, but on Shavuos there is a special Avodas Hayom that is performed in the Beis HaMikdash, and that is the bringing of the 2 loaves of bread from the new crop, the Shtei HaLechem. So on the one hand, it does have an Avodas Hayom, some special service, but it's not the traditional one that we've come to expect from the other Shalosh Regalim, matzah, sukkah, and lulav. The primary difference, of course, being that matzah and lulav are. Let's just talk about their function for a second. If you think about Sukkot and Pesach, you have a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of simcha on all the shalosh regalim. That's really what these avodas hayom are part of. In fact, Tosfos in Pesachim Daf Chasam Beis, which we won't look at inside, but he has an extreme position that any of the services that are performed on a particular day, for example, the 4 cups of wine that we drink on Pesach, Tosfos has an extreme suggestion that unless we fulfill all of the mitzvos of that day, we have not properly fulfilled our mitzvah of simcha on the holiday. He says for failing to drink the 4 cups of wine as directed actually is a deficiency in our performance of the mitzvah of simcha. That is an extreme formulation, but certainly when you look at the way the Rishonim deal with the various mitzvos hayom of sukkah, matzah, and lulav, you see that the mitzvahs hayom is connected to the mitzvah of simcha. The Rambam says, for example, that the mitzvah of taking the lulav is a mitzvah of taking the lulav and being happy with it. Vilis moach bo. Again, not the subject of tonight's shir, but it's clear that the mitzvah of the day is connected to simcha. Why is that true? How is that so? I think it's very clear that the mitzvos hayom are designed to function as props, as you would have on a movie set. We have this communal source of simcha. On Pesach, we were taken out of Egypt several thousand years ago. That is a true source of simcha in one sense, but it is also a challenging source of simcha for me today in 2020, because yes, I know I'm supposed to link myself back, but it's a challenge to do so. So what does the Torah do? It gives us a particular mitzvah, a prop that we use on the holiday to link ourselves up to the communal source of simcha. On Pesach, it's matzah. We eat matzah and we put ourselves back, we link ourselves back to the communal historical event that is the true source of the simcha. And similarly on Sukkot, we sit in this sukkah. Why? Ki basukoso shavti es b'nei Yisrael b'otziosam. We do it to remember the booths, either the special cloud protection or the booth protection that God provided for us in Egypt. So we have a communal source of simcha that occurred several thousand years ago, and we are able to connect ourselves to that through the use of the Torah's prescribed prop. That is missing on Shavuos. There are a few other things that are missing on Shavuos. And this is where we start to break, we see that Shavuos really breaks the mold. The shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread, was odd. But what are the other major things that are really missing from the holiday of Shavuos that we would expect there to be in light of its inclusion in the shalosh regalim? Number one, anyone have anything that bothers them about Shavuos that's different about Shavuos compared to Pesach and Sukkot, for example? I see everyone's muted, so it may take too much time for people to jump in, but feel free. 7 days versus 1 day. Each of the other shalosh regalim is a elongated period of time. 7 days, 8 days. Shavuos, oddly, is 1 day. That seems very strange. But
it's an atzeret. Shavuos is an atzeret for Pesach.
It is true that there is one of the ways of explaining how Shavuos sort of fits into the framework is as you suggested, a sort of tack on to Pesach, but as an independent regel, which is the way it's presented in the Torah, as an independent regel, it is missing the 7 day the 7 day period. But that's a fair enough explanation that may not push us over the edge in suggesting that Shavuos must be a totally different animal. That's fair.
It also has a different agrarian component.
It does.
Pesach is the beginning, Sukkot is an end, and Shavuos is sort of in the middle.
I think that's a critical point and a very good one. We're going to return to that in a minute. I think the thing that is most troubling about Shavuos fitting into the Shalosh Regalim, of course, is the fact that Shavuos has no date. Shavuos is the only holiday in the Torah that has no date. It is the only holiday even outside of the Torah, Purim and Hanukkah included, that is not associated with a calendar date. This is extraordinarily odd. I know we're used to it by now, and sometimes we don't always question these things, but this is one that we need to question. Shavuos having no date is just absolutely screaming out for an explanation. It can't possibly be the same as Pesach and Sukkot, or any of the other holidays for that matter, because it's missing a date. Why is that? Why would the Torah not tell us when Shavuos is supposed to be commemorated? We all know when the Torah was given. In fact, it's worse than that. Presumably, the date that would have been given is Vav Sivan, the 6th day of Sivan, which is the date that the Torah was supposedly given. But if you look at the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Peches, which we're going to get to, or Pei Vav, which we're going to get to in next week in Daf Yomi, you will see that there's actually a dispute about whether or not the Torah was actually given on Friday, this coming Friday, whether it was given on Vav Sivan. How are we memorializing this event of the giving of the Torah without even giving us the date on which we're supposed to celebrate this? And potentially we are celebrating the holiday on a day where the Torah was not even given. And I think this really gets us thinking that we are in an extremely odd scenario in one sense with Shavuos. It fits into the mold at a very high level, Korbanos. It fits in because it has a Liyah L'Regel. It has a mitzvah Chagiga. It has a mitzvah of Simcha. But when you look at the nitty gritty, the details, it's missing so much. But the final straw that breaks the camel's back is an opinion that is expressed in the Mishnah in Moed Katan Daf Yud Tes, a very off the beaten path opinion that we don't paskin like, but one that I want to share with you for a moment. We all know that when, God forbid, somebody is sitting Shiva, he's an Avelis for a relative, and a holiday comes around, what happens? Well, if Shabbos comes around, Shabbos suspends Shiva, and Shiva continues after Shabbos. Same thing happens for Shloshim. When a holiday rolls around, we're all familiar with the halacha that the holiday actually entirely breaks and defeats Shiva. And so Shiva is over. Even if you sat Shiva for only 2 days, you're done and you don't continue Shiva afterward. That's the halacha we're all familiar with. And that is the halacha that is recounted in the Mishnah Moed Katan Daf Yud Tes. There is a very little known opinion there by one Tana, which says there's one exception to that rule. Misha Charav Beis HaMikdash, once the Mikdash was destroyed, Atzeres Kishabbos. The holiday of Shavuos is treated like Shabbos. That is, if God forbid somebody lost a relative yesterday, and this was the time of the Mikdash, rather than end Shiva with the coming of Shavuos tomorrow, on Friday, they would suspend Shiva just like Shabbos and pick it right back up on Sunday. There is no explanation given as to why that is, and this is one of the bigger mysteries, according to the Rishonim, why this would possibly be. Why would Shavuos, after the Mikdash was destroyed, potentially have a different treatment of the Hilchos Avelis? And I think this is the final straw that breaks the camel's back, as I said, and causes us to reevaluate our assumptions about whether Shavuos really is like the other holidays. And I think if you look at what's going on with the mitzvah, with the holiday of Shavuos, we can start to put this all back together and build this puzzle in a very different way. And it all goes back to the Avodas Hayom. We said the first thing that started to clue us into the fact that Shavuos is different is that there's no mitzvahs Hayom. There's no particular service, individual service on that day, like matzah, sukkah, lulav. There's no prop to link us back to the historical event that happened to our Jewish community, to Bnei Yisrael, that's missing on Shavuos. Why is that missing on Shavuos? If you pay attention to what the Torah says, Shavuos is described 5 times in the Torah, in all 5 places. How many times is it described as Ma Matan Toratenu? 0, not once. Every single time it is described by way of reference to the agricultural cycle and the agricultural piece that it represents, the agrarian role that it represents that was mentioned earlier. That is the exclusive description of Shavuos. Chag HaKatzir, the harvest festival, Chag HaBikurim, the festival when first fruits are brought. And I think this tells us the critical clue that we needed to figure out why Shavuos is really different. Shavuos is different because the mitzvah of Simcha on every Yontif is comprised of 2 components. There is a communal component and an individual component. We can all be happy, but that's not called simcha shel mitzvah. That's not what the Torah calls happiness. The Torah refers to happiness as being happy, but being happy because you are recognizing where the source of that happiness is, God. And so you realize that God has created us as part of the Jewish people, what he's done in creating the world, and what he's done to provide for us, and so on and so forth. These two components are like a horse and carriage. You cannot have one without the other. It's just totally lacking if you have a mitzvah of simcha, if you have simcha without the link to the community and to God. And it's totally lacking if you just have a communal source of simcha without being able to link yourself, chain yourself to that event. On Pesach and Sukkot, what is the missing component? It is the individual connection to the communal source of simcha. On Pesach and on Sukkot, the source of simcha is very clear. The Torah tells us why. We are commemorating historical events that were monumental and that have lasting effects on us. And so we take the prop the Torah prescribes and we use it to link ourselves back to that communal event. And that's how we get the two components linked up together. On Shavuot, it's the exact opposite. On Shavuot, we are naturally happy. We don't need to create a sense of happiness by linking ourselves back to a communal historical event that took place thousands of years ago. Why? For the point that was mentioned a few moments ago. On Shavuot, we are at the beginning of the agricultural cycle known as the harvest season. Multiple religions, multiple societies and models have a harvest festival. And the reason is because it is an extraordinarily joyous time. I would compare it nowadays to the non-agrarian society we live in, to December for many businesses, to bonus season. It's a joyous time. People are seeing how God provided for their families, etc., or how they were able to provide for their families, what their family's going to have to live on. It's a joyous time by definition. And so we already have the individual link to the simcha. What's missing? What's missing is the channeling that towards the community, towards God. The danger on Shavuot, unlike Pesach and Sukkot, the opposite. The danger on Shavuot is that I'm just going to be happy like the regular harvest festivals of all the religions, and I'm not going to link that back to God and to the community, to the Jewish community. And so what do? The Torah prescribes for us a mitzvah hayom, a particular avoda that is designed to add that second component back in, and that is the bringing of the shtei halechem, the bringing of the 2 loaves of bread, to link the celebration of the harvest, using the new harvest, the first wheat that we harvest, we use it towards bringing a korban in the Beis HaMikdash to commemorate the fact that we realize this all comes from God. And so you really do have the same 2 components at the end of the day on Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos, but it's in reverse order. On Pesach and Sukkot, you start with a communal historical event and you link yourself back to it with the props the Torah prescribes. On Shavuos, it's the opposite. You start with simcha from the agricultural cycle of the nature of the holiday, the harvest festival, and you need to link it to a communal, spiritual understanding in order to give that meaning, and that's what the Shtei Halechem is for. I think understanding these two 180-degree opposite approaches to how you get to the same place with these this fused nature of Simcha will explain all of the questions that we posed a few moments ago. And let's go in reverse order. We noticed several things that were different about Shavuos relative to the Shalosh Regalim. We mentioned that it had no date. We mentioned that it had only 1 day and not 7 days. And we mentioned that the Avodas Hayom was different. The Avodas Hayom we just addressed. Why is the Avodas Hayom not an individual one? Because that's not the component that's lacking. Why is it only 1 day instead of 7? The reason why it's 1 day instead of 7 is because on the communal historical events, we need 7 days to link ourselves back to an old source of simcha. We need to really put ourselves in the mindset of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not going on right now. We need to do work to get ourselves back to that. On Shavuos, we are trying to capture lightning in a bottle. It is the harvest festival. It is the day when we are celebrating the harvest. And so we already are happy. We are capturing that. And our only challenge is channeling that to God. I think this also explains that very odd shita in the Gemara, in the Mishnah Moed, which we'll get to in a minute. But I want to explain now, having built this together with you, the problem that I think many of you may be seeing before your very eyes. The critical component to Shavuos that makes the simcha a complete simcha is the mitzvah of the shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread. The problem with that mitzvah, as opposed to matzah and sukkah and lulav, is that the shtei alechem can only be brought in the Beis HaMikdash. It's not an individual mitzvah. And so with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash 2,000 years ago, came the potential and the actual destruction of the holiday of Shavuos. The entire holiday falls apart without that key component making the simcha a spiritual one through the mitzvah hayom of the shtei alechem. And so Chazal were confronted with a harsh reality that with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of our temple, came the destruction of our holiday of Shavuos. And Chazal were faced with a real dilemma: what to do. Are we going to allow Shavuos to continue as an empty holiday, devoid of this spiritual component? And Chazal came up with a brilliant solution, in my opinion. And Chazal created a new Shavuos, what I call Shavuos B. Shavuos A is the one that's described in the Torah, has nothing to do with commemorating the giving of the Torah, has everything to do with the harvest festival. Chazal said that holiday cannot exist post-Mikdash for the reasons we just described. How can we resurrect the holiday of Shavuos? And Chazal said we have a model. What's the other model for a holiday? It's built on a communal historical event that happened to our people thousands of years ago, a monumental event. Is there any candidate for such an event that we can now pivot to in commemorating and celebrating Shavuos? And Chazal said the Matan Torah is a monumental historical event that has no holiday associated with it. We are not commemorating it through a holiday. And it happens to be that it occurs within one day of the holiday of Chag HaKatzir. And so Chazal created Shavuos B, a totally new Shavuos that was designed to mirror the holidays of Pesach and Shavuot and Sukkot, in that it is now commemorating a communal historical event, and as a result, it fits right back into the framework. Chazal kept this on the down low. They didn't tell anybody about it because they were trying to keep the holiday going, but they created an entirely new nature of the holiday. And I know we're running out of time. We only have 2 minutes left, so let me try to wrap it all up. And so Chazal created this holiday that we all know, the holiday of Matan Torah, which is Shavuos B. And that's why you never see any reference to Matan Torah with respect to Shavuos in the Torah itself. This explains, however, this new holiday doesn't have an Avodas Hayom. And so the mitzvah of Simcha is now completely communal. It's not individual. And as a result of that, I think we can now understand the last 2 questions that we posed during this year. We asked, why would it be you have this weird shita that on Shavuos in particular, you're allowed to celebrate Lachem and Lashem together. You can have the happiness of yourself and the dedication to Hashem together. Why? The simcha of Lachem on Shavuos is different from every other holiday because the Lachem is devoid of an individual component. There's no individual mitzvah hayom. And as a result, it is less in tension with the mitzvah of devoting the day to God. It is only on that day that we are allowed to do Lachem and Lashem together. And that was Rabbi Eliezer's position. And that is the position that we said, we mentioned the Hilchos Avelos, that weird shita and Hilchos Avelos, that when it comes to Avelos on Shavuos post-Mikdash, Shavuos, unlike any other holiday, post-Mikdash does not break Shiva, but instead it suspends Shiva. Why would that be, we asked? I think it's because it's also missing the individual experience, emphasis on Simcha because of the new nature of the holiday. And as a result, it is only on Shavuos post-Mikdash that it can coexist with Avelos, as opposed to the intense Simcha that breaks Shiva. The last point I'll make, because I know everybody has to go with the end of the shir, but the usual suspects moment for the shir, of course. Who is the author of the opinion in Moe Kata and Daf Yud Tes that they have this weird position that on Shavuos post-Mikdash, Avelos is treated differently and only then? You can take a look for yourselves, but it's the same Rabbi Eliezer that we started this year with. It's the same Rabbi Eliezer who has the odd shita that Lashem and Lachem cannot possibly coexist. And so with that, I think we understand the untold story of Shavuos is that the Chazal created an entirely new holiday when the Mikdash was destroyed to avoid the destruction of the holiday of Shavuos at the same time of the destruction of our holy temple. And I hope you can put all the rest of that together. I'm happy to answer questions either online or separately via email, because I know we ran out of time at the end, but thanks for joining.
All right, thank you, Jason. I'll keep the Zoom open in case anyone does want to further discuss, but right now you can jump to the next year, which is Rabbi Bashevkin. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Jason, for presenting. Chag Sameach.
Thanks.
Jason, this increases your holiday count. At the last year, what was the holiday count? 8, but now with 2.0, are we up to 9?
We're up to depends how you count, but yeah, we're getting up there. Shavuos B is definitely the one that's counted least. But I think that's what's going on over here. That's why you have this really odd Torah never tells you what this holiday is really about, because the Torah is telling you what it's about, but it's a different holiday. It's Shavuos A, not Shavuos B. There are other proofs to this this thesis, particularly the Mishnah in Pesachim Daf Samachem Amid Beis, which spawns the discussion that we started with. There's a major question on that Mishnah that Tosfos raises that is that he doesn't really have a good answer for. I think he says that, and I think this explanation would explain that as well, that it's only post Mikdash that Shavuos is different. But Rabbi Eliezer seems to be the Tana who best appreciated this story and wanted to act on this. I think, people have asked me, I've spoken about this thesis in other contexts. People have asked me, why don't we see this anywhere? Why don't Chazal tell us about the fact that they pivoted to a new holiday? And I think the answer is Chazal their solution was brilliant. There's no reason why we should have been able to save the holiday of Shavuos from the empty shell that it would have been had it stayed the holiday that the Torah prescribed. It's a brilliant solution to identify the sort of critical components to a holiday and say, I can literally pivot without doing anything. It's the same day. I should have pointed out. Why does Shavuos not have a date? It has no date because when you're not commemorating an historical event, you don't put a date. That's actually the best way for the Torah to communicate to us that we're not commemorating an historical event. It doesn't give it a date. That's proof positive that we're not commemorating a historical event. But Chazal recognized that notwithstanding that, it happens to come out by Vav Sivan, which is within one day of the giving of the Torah. So taking their understanding of how holidays work in the other model for Pesach and Sukkot, and then applying it here and saying there's another event that we can commemorate that has never been associated with the holiday for whatever reason. And there's lots of good explanations, lots of good Torah as to why would the Torah not have made a holiday to commemorate Matan Torah. That's a lot of Rishonim and Achronim deal with that. That fits right in over here. Whatever the reason is, that's why the Torah didn't do it. It's not why the Torah didn't say it. It's why the Torah didn't do it. It never created such a holiday. And what what Chazal did is they realized that to save the holiday, they would be able to very quietly pivot the nature of the holiday. And then you see all of this developing post Mikdash, all these references to Matan Torah, Ma Matan Torah Tenu, and that's what we all learn as kindergartners and don't know to question once we get to the primary sources. Any other questions anyone has? I'm happy to address. All right.
Jason, in your view, is this post Mikdash 1 or post Mikdash 2?
Oh, sorry. It's post Mikdash 2. That's a good question. What happened during those 70 years? That's a good question. Presumably, they knew that it was coming, and so they didn't need. They knew there was no elongated period of time when Shavuos A would be threatened and needed to be recreated. But that is a good point. All right. Well, Chag Sameach, everybody. Thanks again for joining. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email.
Nice job, Jason.